campaign, related to the campaign of Bolivar versus Monroe. In this opportunity,
pensamiento colonizador. Así que darle la bienvenida a quienes ya nos vienen acompañando.
In this opportunity,
por acá, pero que sí es importante volver a presentarlos, que es Carlos Ron y Guillermo Barreto, que son quienes van a iniciar hoy este asalto, y luego José Ernesto Nováez Guerrero, que es periodista, escritor e investigador, y actualmente coordina el capítulo cubano de la Red en Defensa de la Humanidad, y es colaborador habitual de diversas publicaciones en Cuba y el extranjero. Así que Carlos y Guillermo, si quieren iniciar, y antes una pequeña aclaración, también celebrar este encuentro porque están haciendo varias cositas para que esto esté sucediendo efectivamente ahora, porque estamos transmitiendo por YouTube, pero nosotros estamos en un Zoom y también incorporando a...
we are doing a trial
para poder incorporarse a la plataforma de Zoom, y esto es una de las consecuencias del bloqueo y de las sanciones que hay en contra de la isla, así que celebramos igualmente que podamos estar todos acá discutiendo y conversando al respecto de estas
blockades the communications
y muchas gracias
Zoom
obviamente por
for the
sumarse el
Cubans.
día de hoy y brindarnos su tiempo y su...
We thank all for being part of
si quieren comenzar.
this conference. We are ready to begin, Carlos. Buenas tardes. Good night, good afternoon to all. To continue our debate, our conversation, our encounter, where we discuss two different opposite models of Bolivar and Monroe. We discuss in particularly the thinking of Bolivar as a tool of a fight for freedom and a new world. When he says the best government is the one who provides the more happiness to its people. It has to do with the conception of the world we have, the view of the world. It doesn't come alone. Bolivar had a master, a teacher, Rodriguez. We could tell he is probably the first decolonial thinker. Simón Rodriguez was a teacher. He was also a person with a very revolutionary thinking. Father of a popular education. He founded many schools with great impact. During the colony period, he began teaching Bolivar these ideas, which will repercute and be echoed by Bolivar. I have a cite from Simón Bolivar which explains his position. In a letter, he says, the knowledge of Europe and US are enemies of the liberty to think in America. It shows the US in reference to US European thinking. It overflows the colonies and Latin American countries is assumed universal. but it's really colonizing and blocks the true freedom thinking. When Simón Rodríguez when Simón Rodríguez comes back to America, he's designated as education minister. In another letter, in the year 1832, he says, I left Europa to be with Europa, to be with Bolivar, not for him to protect me, but to help construct the reality of a free Latin American, as Bolivar thought about it. He was critical in the idea of bringing a new thinking, a new form of thinking different from those of Europe and US. He's doing another side. The site says we need to break the relation to the education, which is
de las tinieblas. Un pueblo ignorante es un instrumento ciego de su propia destrucción. Para Bolívar es muy importante,
an education that is corrupt and it really promotes self-destruction. It is through the popular education that we can eradicate the Occidental thinking. It says that the identity is very important. And in relation to that, he says that Simón Rodríguez says that we are not Europeans or US. We come from Africans and Indians. And from that, we have to to construct our identity.
Nosotros en este sentido tenemos, bueno, hay un contraste, por supuesto, con lo que...
There is a contrast from what we've been discussing in the other assaults between exceptionalism by the US
señalábamos aquella contradicción que por una parte pretendía ser excepcional, se reconocía como
and the contradiction when the US politics and thinking comes from a logic where supposedly they have no reference, but
y sin embargo, siendo estas unas características muy diferentes a las nuestras, pretendían tener una especie de universalizar, mejor
but
dicho.
at the same time, they wanted to refer to a universal thinking. On the other hand, there are
el conflicto entonces termina siendo no solamente la confrontación en nuestro
the Latin American thinking that have promoted the Occidental exceptionalist thinking within the continent.
empiezan a ver al propio pensamiento nativo como una fórmula atrasada.
Prioritizing or preferring the outside thinking, the outsider thinker, where the national and local thinking is thought as lower in a way, and they prefer, instead of preferring the thinking related to our origins, they prefer to promote the outsiders thinking. There is a Puerto Rican, he named another person, I couldn't get it. Luis Lloren Torres is a writer. He adopted the name Piti Yankee, with each these people who defended the outsiders thinking, which would in reference which would refer to the outsider defenders, the national people of the Latin American and Caribbean, which defended the ideas of the US. And he's citing this person, this Piti Yankee, which is, we would say locally, like a wannabe, someone which pretends to be an outsider. They have an attitude of imitating the other to become, to be part of. If the other diseño Irigori refers to the Piti Yankee as well, and he cites again. When he uses the concept of Piti Yankee, he's trying to refer to, he's trying to alert, to warn the nationals of the issues, of the worries that we need to have of having Yankees or people, Yanquisitos, as he says, people that adopt these outside ideologies that goes against the national politics, with at the end up giving out the country. What is interesting is that sometimes this warning has become a reality in many instances, where even the government, high political government persons have employed this politics, this way of thinking, this outsider's vision in total risk, putting in risk the national resources. He says he's using a word, entreguista. It's people, this type of people which adopt the outsider's thinking. Is when he says it's entreguista, it's people that is giving out the country. And he's reflecting now that this type of thinking comes from a notion where nationals just do not have the capacity to develop on themselves. It's an inferiority issue where we the nationals see. Again, he's referring to the PT Yankees. we see ourselves as inferiors, and we prefer to assume outsiders thinking. Is it citing again? Bolivar, when he says, even though US is a very powerful country, it doesn't mean we have to minimize ourselves. He then explains an analogy, it's part of the site, between the cats and the mouse, where we are where we should be the cats and not the rats, the mouse. If we are the mouses, we are a part of, we are being the victims, right? The ones to be eaten. But if we decide to become the cats, we can establish a relation of respect, of equals. There's no one has to be the mouse. We can be cats.
Hay una cosa que es importante, que ese peligro del cual nos está hablando Carlos, y que
That danger of promoting the outsiders thinking, the pity yankee thinking, those people that sell sell themselves.
de la propia izquierda latinoamericana y de la propia de las fuerzas patriotas, como ese pensamiento
How this patriotic thinking, this euro thinking ends up helping or promoting the failing of national projects.
Los códigos que consultaban nuestros magistrados no eran los que podían enseñarles la ciencia.
They continue citing the codes of our justice system.
Presuponiendo la perfectibilidad del linaje humano. Esos son esos puristas que uno ve en nuestra izquierda a veces, que entonces la revolución se imagina la revolución de una forma, y si no es de esa forma, entonces asumen que hubo una derrota o que ya no se pudo, ¿no? Y entonces son los hipercríticos, ¿no? Que terminan haciendo el juego.
Then we enter on another phase. We become the hypercritics. The same way we have philosophers as the same way we have philosophers as governors. The other way we had governors. We had educators as in the military.
Esto se continúa en la historia de América Latina. En los 70 cita
in the 70s, Jorge Belardo Ramos says,
en esa izquierda latinoamericana del siglo XX, un revolucionario verdadero y mucho
a revolutionary person, a truly revolutionary and Marxist should choose between gold
no solamente distinguir escoria de oro, hay que saber escoger dónde se queda uno. Y él pone un ejemplo. Esto no es tan
and escoria. It is not that simple. When the Bolivia government on the October 17 accepted the bloc, it didn't there were many Uruguayans leftists who preferred to point at the left movement, and at the same time they were looking for the errors on the left. They were, without noticing, promoting the right arousal. Now we have leftists who criticize the extractivism, but they don't talk about the Peru and right government minds. They only criticize the extractivism in the left context, but they don't do so on the right governments, which are worse. There are positions based on an ideological, intellectual thinking, but it's incapable of differentiating between our roots, our thinking, our processes. It's important to know, to understand that the revolutionary processes are contradictory. And we need to understand that in order to be proactive on the critic and be constructive on the critic we provide, so we don't make the game to the imperialism thinking. Final thinking related to Vietnam. There is something related to the South.
Lo que considera cómo se entiende a sí mismo el pensamiento estadounidense.
How does Vietnamese people see the U.S. thinking, as an example? Decía, U.S. This is a site. U.S. is a confused country. They believe in a divine justice where human race is the culpable, pecadores. But at the same time, the humans in the society are assumed innocence. But how they deal with it is that they say innocent people justify their innocence once and once again. They justify their innocence by a justice. On the other hand, in the case of the Vietnamese, we may not have a divine power or divine justice, but we know our darkness and how to deal with it.
Sí, buenas tardes. Bueno, voy a tratar de hablar.
Bueno,
Somos famosos por hablar bastante rápido.
Candice, if you want to take this one.
Agradecer la invitación y bueno, la conferencia magistral de los compañeros del Instituto Simón Bolívar, que siempre es muy enriquecedor escucharlos y que sin duda han dado un pie excelente para un conjunto de ideas que quería apuntar en apretada síntesis. Para no extenderme demasiado, había tomado algunas notas que voy a ir leyendo y comentando en aras también de ganar precisión y tiempo. Bueno, lo primero es apuntar
The first thing I want to take note, Doctrina Monroe Doctrine is part of the capitalism ideology that gives rises to the U.S. nation. As it goes directly to the power foundation, but it responds to the logic, to the European logic, which is in response to the feudal system that is happening in Europe. It's an adaptation. Monroe Doctrine establishes a new parameter in terms of economic development. It is a neo-colonial domination doctrine over the region, the American region, although it was not expressed or understood as it on the beginning. This principle of colonial dominance, it's been understood later with some examples such as the naval bases around Latin America, the cultural dominance, as well as the economic pressure. At the end of the 19th century, U.S. is able to fight the European power
coloniales de Europa y que se va a fortalecer aún más luego de las dos guerras mundiales, donde sin duda el gran ganador va a ser el capitalismo norteamericano. Y va a estar reforzado
after the World War II. The great winner was definitely the capitalism movement. And it would be great to reference Fanon to observe the processes of independence of different countries and how they are examples, evidence of similar process in America, where it is impossible for another thing other than the bourgeois class, which is gonna protect their own interests in their countries and will foster the colonial status quo.
Cuales van a ir emergiendo como naciones soberanas a finales del siglo XVIII, en el caso de Haití, y principios del siglo XIX, en el caso de muchas de las naciones.
At Haiti and many other nations. The new states started to get tired internally, and they were under a lot of domination, racial, and a lot of discrimination, which would have come out of the white Europeans, which affects them up to this day. So when we look at all the invasions that happen, and we look at all of the European powers and the North American powers, and is going to play a major role when we look at the colonial and neo-colonial development in the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, which continues to live within our nations. And when we look at the end of the hegemony and of the West, how did the revolutionary forces react? They did a critical analysis from then until now. And that hegemony has not been sufficiently discussed. So when we look at the revolutionary examples, and we look at the different attitudes towards imperialism, when we look at the Mexican Revolution, and we look at the agrarian situation of all of Mexico, there was a lot of anti-imperialist action. So when we look up to the ends of the struggle, it's been more or less successful. We have Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. We've had processes with all of their particularities. We've seen maturity in their aspirations, in their leadership. And they're able to even go beyond their own realities. When we look at Latin America, we have great examples. Leaders who were persecuted in that time because of the reality in which they existed. And in Latin America, we have looked at the critical thought in a very wide way. And we've continued the work of Lenin, continuing this revolutionary thought. A lot of the great processes, a lot of the great training, in addition to the political struggle, the armed struggle, it's been an education, a popular, sustained education. And the comrades of the Simón Bolivar Institute, they are the prolongation of this process. And when we think about the Latin American critical thought, there are many sectors, and Marxism has played a very big role and has had large influence. And they have this liberal thought throughout the entire region, and the protection of their own resources. So I'm going to try to do a short synthesis of some of the main characteristics of this critical thought in the last 2 centuries. The discussion around the dispute of colonialism in our realities, the roles played by our governments, and the coming together of our free nations. We see it in Martí, in Bolivar, in Latin America. And to bring forward this reality, to have a better understanding of Latin America, to revalue everything that was denied, everything that was destroyed in this process of conquest, but something that we have been able to recuperate in many countries. And there's also the need to understand all of our identities and our struggle from our own perspective, and to have our own intellectuals without leaving this production analysis. For example, in the school, the Mariátegui School, they have their own critical analysis, and they're doing a political process in Latin America. And there's also an alternative vision to the Western vision. And it has also been a reivindication of the South in its own academic and theoretical process. We have many movements with a wide range of their own thoughts, and that's very fundamental. So as long as we continue thinking with the North American and European thought, that's just a prolongation of the hegemony of colonialism and neocolonialism. We have to be capable of understanding the contradictions of our continent, and we need to transform them. So there was a rereading that was Marxist of the humanist sectors within the region against those of the oppressor. And it's now done from those who are oppressed. And a good example is the theory of liberation. And this is to give sense, give meaning to the project for the continent and for our people. Within our own ideological groups, and to counter this new colonial and colonial thinking that comes from North America. So we need critical thought in a scenery of battle, and create and continue this struggle for emancipation in our lands. And we also want our own Marxist thought, which is different to what you have as Marxist thought within Europe. Because colonialism is not just from the political and economic domination, but there's also a domination, an intellectual domination, with a lot of dogma imposing an explanation of reality, which is insufficient to understand our own realities. And against this limited vision, we want to have a Marxism that is rich, that is live, that questions the socialism of our own realities. With a potential for even the Soviet Union, we have people like Mariátegui, Che, who are great thinkers. We also need an economic thought that understands our regional evolution without ending up in the same places where we were before. So we can have a revolution of the thought of our own people. So we can have a theoretical thought which understands and identifies the particularities of our social practice within the region. We need our own, we have our own challenges, we have our own achievements, and so we need to defend from Latin America, from our reality, from what was brought forward and forged within Latin America. We could talk about Che, we could talk about Fidel, we could talk about Comandante Hugo Chavez. So the people that are in this process of construction can bring forward our own reality. We need to redignify the people of these countries. We need to criticize the hegemonic cultures and their consciousness in their attempt to direct our emancipatory process. We can look at Paulo Freire and his concept of the oppressed. And we have to have a bibliography of our own thinkers, our own intellectuals. All of these people are present. We need to give an idea of how this North American thought has been developed when we look at our own independence and emancipation, so that we can create the fundamental groups to address the new colonial project within our region. We need to have some final considerations. So when we look at this critical thought within our region, we can't just talk about action in terms of the colonial and new colonial action within our region, but we also need to bring in the great liberating thoughts in order to have a new consciousness in this process. Without this new process, all of it is going to fail. All of the critical thoughts, all of the critical thought within the region come from strong anti-imperialist thoughts. If we have a left that is imperialist, then it can't understand who the enemy is. And they cannot reclaim their sovereignty. They cannot reclaim the dignity of the people. We need anti-imperialism, because without that, we cannot have any real critical thought in Latin America.
No solo del lado de la pequeña secta a la que pertenecemos, y esto en medio de una izquierda especializada en fragmentarse.
We've always been in the middle of a left that has been fragmented. And we have to look at the example, additionally, from the Simón Bolivar Institute, there's a sort of a lack of comprehension. And it's something that we need to be careful with, because we are running the risk that we end up in a dialogue with the revolutionary forces, that the Latin American forces are completely homogeneous. And it's difficult to look at what's happening as the normal state of things. But we need to assume all of this liberating thought. And I just want to end with an anecdote from Marx, and talks about what is the role of critical thought. And one of the questions was, Marx said that struggle And critical thought is the reason for being
Y me atrevería a
in
añadir
struggle.
con el Che que el deber de todo revolucionario, de todo militante, de
And as
izquierda,
Che said, every
es no solo
revolutionary, every
agitarse,
person of the left,
con este pensamiento crítico, sino luchar hasta la victoria siempre. Muchas gracias.
is not just fighting for critical thought, but always towards victory. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, José Ernesto. Y bueno, en esta última parte, hacerle llegar dos preguntas que nos hicieron.
So thank you very much. Now I'm gonna open for any questions. If you have any questions, any reflections that you want to share. And when we think of all these different meetings, we have to think of what is actually in dispute within all of these struggles. So when we think of all these different different models and all the different sectors of power, the imperialist sectors.
Ante una coyuntura sociopolítica compleja, ¿cuáles son los retos que hoy tenemos los movimientos?
So we need to think about what are the challenges that we have as social movements, as militants, to have a critical thought. So, I open the floor.
Yo creo que los profes pudieran comenzar respondiendo y yo añado algo luego.
Bueno, sí, es que es compleja, no son tan fáciles las preguntas. Miren, yo creo que nosotros tenemos...
I think our movements have a great
que lo presenta la tecnología. Un desafío
desafío.
Tiene por un lado muchas ventajas porque
On one side,
podemos comunicarnos mucho
on one side,
más rápido.
with technology, we can communicate easier.
El desarrollo tecnológico que existe hoy, pero eso también nos abre el campo a un pensamiento que puede ser
but it also opens our mind to other ways of thinking, more superficial.
Son válidas o solo lo que podamos transmitir en 2 minutos
Whatever, we have this challenge, what we can transmit on a TikTok message in a specific amount of time, in a specific amount of word. The problems of Latin America are not superficial, not easy to be resolved on 3 lines. So we have a challenge to understand that technology is a tool, but it's not a focus of our intellectual work and critical thinking. We have to promote profound, deep thinking, deep and collective thinking. The idea of the meeting, the space of the meeting where we gather together to discuss our problems and our solutions. There is another idea that I've been thinking in relation to this AI issue. Chavez would insist on that what we were creating was not only a communal state, but a communal society. This idea of artificial intelligence where everything is individual, where the AI could even this false idea that the AI could replace the government, because you can do everything online.
Bueno, van desapareciendo incluso algunas funciones de Estado, ¿no? O pudiese
That
darse
it
la
might
situación
be
que
right, or
lleva a otro tipo de...
it could be that a scenario where
Entonces,
some functions of the state can disappear, but and
la sociedad común.
between, in front of that, it's important for us
Creemos en
to
las verdaderas soluciones a nuestros problemas,
defend and promote
de la justicia
the
social,
communal space,
en el relacionamiento entre
the,
nosotros como seres humanos.
the society as a place of
Directo,
justice,
que
of fighting for our rights, our
es lo que nos da
the communal is what
una ventana o una
allows for a
hacia la
space
realidad, hacia la realidad concreta, hacia la transformación concreta,
for
que no
transformation,
solamente
concrete
en lo
transformation, for
superficial.
concrete interaction, not the superficial, not the individual.
Referentes importantes que podemos utilizar.
We have a lot of
Los movimientos sociales,
important reference
que son la
in
popular,
terms of social movements.
o sea, tenemos herramientas que nos permiten
He
la discusión y el debate en función de las necesidades de nuestros propios
provides a
problemas,
great tool,
y que eso
Paulo Freire,
tenemos.
to resolve our
Siento
problems.
una gran preocupación por el tema, sobre todo
I have a worry, particularly with the youth, and how do
esa rutina de estudio y de formación,
we take back
nuestro propio referente
this
y las
study
técnicas que ya hemos desarrollado en América Latina
routine
para la formación y para la construcción
around Latin American studying, around the Latin American and Caribbean thinking. I'm adding the Caribbean, as you know, I'm from Puerto Rico,
prioridad en el trabajo de los
as a priority to
había
wake around the
dinámica diaria,
Latin American
trabajo
thinking
que hay que hacer,
as a
que
project.
como que no queda tiempo,
We have so many
pero esa
jobs to
es
do
la trampa que nos
that
puede
we don't have time. We can feel that we don't have time for study, but we need to
y entonces dejamos de hacer algo que
keep working
esa formación colectiva. No solamente que cada quien
in
estudie
order
su
to
sino que en colectivo se va generando conocimiento,
have a
nosotros
collective
acceder a
formation
los referentes
to
históricos
discuss our problems,
ya
to understand our problems, but also to understand our references.
años de autores y autoras. Entonces,
The Cuban guy gave us a great
darnos el espacio. Entonces, bueno, ni siquiera vamos a hacer una pancarta porque le decimos a la inteligencia artificial que nos haga la pancarta.
in terms of AI can become superficial. We can ask our AI to provide us work, for example, a poster. But we need to create in collective. We need to create a content collectively. These questions are not easy to answer. Every every attempt to answer this question is going to be not sufficient. Anyways, we need to fight in different dimensions. One is from the articulation. It's impossible from joint movements. It's impossible to fight it individually. Europeans would submit indigenous people, originators people. They had superiority in terms of imperialism and the desire to conquer. But one of the decisive elements was that one of the elements of resistance was marked by the inability to conform a united movement. And that's why the indigenous people were conquered. Imperialists have become very well, they have divide us and not what unite us. We need to make common ground on what unite us and articulate a joint movement to transform the effects of capitalism. How do we do it? That's a big question. But the responsibility of each militant is to attempt to construct the more joints between the movements, the more conjunction between the movements, understand the nature of the capitalism movements and strategies of implementation. I'm going to reference to Marx the idea that the technology is not neutral. Each power force will apply technology to its convenience. Although we are moving to a very individual societal ground where we do not depend on being on a public space to or in group to make things happen, because we socialize through internet, social media, but at the end we are very lonely people where our friends are not real and where we satisfy our human social need. It's a pretending. We are pretending to satisfy our social needs through internet. But where we are going is where human capacity is being reduced. The focus on social and communication mediums, where people it's saturated with news and information, which is false, plurality, which is false, with unnamed, it's of names. I'm losing internet. But they are
una generación cuya cultura audiovisual se educa en TikTok es una generación incapaz de concentrarse en un material audiovisual que dure más de 3 minutos o 5 minutos.
This new generation is unable to focus for more than 3 minutes on an audiovisual presentation. Some time ago, I read this study about the capacity of concentration between youth. Adults will concentrate no more than 3.5 minutes. It's absurd. But it's the result of overstimulation, hyperstimulation. We are victims. Not victims, because the condition of victims indicates we accept it passively. But what we're doing is through social media is we are limiting our capabilities to process information. I'm not saying you to become a monk and not use technology. There is another issue in the individual to militate collectively. If in the person, in the individuality, transform my thinking. I want to reiterate this thing about the hard way, because it invites us to question, to everything, not from a position, from European positions necessarily, not as you to question everything, but on the contrary, but to put everything into criticize everything, to criticize these ideas that are being put into us through media all the time, to a point that it will get us to new positions. Marx would say the tools of critic and the critic of tools. We have to put we need to put the critic, the tools for colonizing, but also the tools for criticizing. We've been bombarded from Occidental Academy by many theories and concepts, apparently revolutionary, apparently liberating, but on the praxis, they are discriminatory, limited in vision, and we have to surpass those ideas. It's difficult to be succinct with this type of question. Lukács would say that the only point of view legitimate, it's the point of view of the totality. A revolutionary would make all causes their own, causes for any individual that suffers any type of damage, limitation, marginalization, but not to stay alone with only one side, only one side. It's incorrect to think that we can emancipate only from one standpoint, from a feminist way of thinking, from a LGBT way of thinking. We have to be total. We have to embark to comprehend all the causes. It will allow us to amplify our understanding of a system that is totalitarian. On the other hand, if we don't do that, we are gonna be partial, and we are only gonna have partial wins. Now, I promise you the last idea. It's fundamental to study history, to know history, to history is the way to even reivindicate our processes against a system that tries to present itself as natural. No way of Marxism demonstrate, and capitalism as well, that no world No system is eternal. It is our responsibility, it is our duty to fight, to understand, to beat the mind poorness, to beat the system and construct a common front to push the limits of our current system. We don't have another planet. We don't have infinite time. We need to take advantage of these crises, as Gramsci would say, and how we take advantage of this time to fight these monsters. We need to conjure these monsters, or we would become the food for these monsters. Thank you, Carlos, Guillermo, y José, for your time, for your participation, and all these tracks, ideas that you provide. Thanks to everything, to everyone who's been part of this effort. We invite you for next Thursday. Thanks for being here. Thanks to translator as well. And thanks for building up your critical thinking. That will be all. Thank you to all. See you.
Hasta pronto, un gusto.
Nos vemos. Ya, estamos. Ya, misión cumplida. Ok, chévere. Bueno, y el inglés yo no sé, yo ahí traduciendo a las millas, porque esta gente, wow. ¿Cómo se escucharon las traducciones? ¿Qué les parecieron? How were the traductions, the translations? Can you hear me? Okay.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Se te escucha, compa, ¿eh? Se te escucha, Cayo.
Sí, sí.
Sí.
No, solo agradecer a todos. Gracias, Amilcar.
Gracias, compa. Salió muy bien.
Chao, compas. Gracias. Buenas
Gracias a
noches.
ustedes. Un
Gracias por
abrazo.
todo.
Nos vemos.